follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Esaenai el heharim me'ayin yavo Ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai osei shamayim va'aretz. I lift mine eyes unto the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your protector will not slumber. Yea, the protector of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. God is your guardian. God is your protection at your right hand. The sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. God will guard you from all harm. God will guard your soul, your going and your coming, now and forever. Kohelet, the author of the biblical book of Ecclesiastes, reminds us that for everything there is a season, a time for every experience under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. I now want to call on Marlene's life partner, Colwyn Butler, who is going to reflect on her life.
Before I share my thoughts about Marlene, I just want to thank her family and friends and colleagues and everyone who expressed their support for her over this agonizing period of time. Lee and Lindsay, who were my constant counsel, and I mean on a daily basis, especially later in the illness, Lee giving me advice and support. Howard and Donna, and for those of you who are not good at geography, I will now inform you that in order to go from Cleveland to Sanibel, you have to pass through New York City to see Marlene. For Alice, who would come up from southern New Jersey, she came 3 times, twice on a bus and a subway to spend an hour with Marlene. For Marilyn, who was my counsel, my steady voice, my guide in many decisions that had to be made, to Marie that would call me and tell me how much she loved Marlene and I, to phone calls that I would get from Holly and Kelly, and a very nice and long and meaningful phone call from Kim that I appreciate very much. And from the artwork and the inspiration provided by Carl and Yael for their daughter Danielle, and Howard and Donna delivered an artwork which is on the table out here, and if you didn't look at it, take the time to look at some of those things, in which Danielle asked if Marlene would be her friend. Friends from Fremont, Ohio were sending emails and calling, and also very supportive. And one of which is here today, Yuri Tallman and his wife Tanya, who now live in Connecticut, flew all the way in today. Excuse me. And other relatives, Lee's children, Ann and Amy, who were in New York, who came by to support, and Robert, who visited and is here today, and Mark. And I thank all of you for that support. And to my surprise, Marlene seemed surprised by the degree of support that she got. I was not surprised by anything that this family does in support of each other. So I only have my mother left as my family for my family, but I'm honored that you've accepted me into your family. I love Marlene very much, but I think equally as important, I respected her, I was challenged by her, she was my best friend, I hope I was her best friend, and we couldn't spend enough time in each other's company. When I first met her, I was sort of like a casual, go along, get along kind of guy. I did my job well enough, but nothing else was too important. And then when I met Marlene, I said, whoa, this is complicated. This is somebody that's beautiful, smart, talented, challenging. She's not going to accept this sort of casual guy for very long. So I had to sort of step up my game. And thankfully, I made the decision to do that. She was a challenge for many people that didn't fully understand her, but she was the warmest, most loving person for other people. Her battle with this disease was extraordinarily difficult. Her suffering was great. Her attitude was not describable. She made the caregivers, she was concerned about how they felt. When people would visit, she would have a big smile, and her eyes would just light up the whole room. And so those of you that visited, it was a remarkable thing, no matter how much discomfort she was in. Her friends from Fremont sent a dozen roses to her on the Tuesday before her passing. And she wasn't too verbally communicative at that point. But the aide came into the room and made a big fuss. Marlene, you're getting roses. And she lit right up. Her eyes lit up. She smiled. She had a smile on her face for 10 minutes. She never conceded defeat. She remained optimistic. She remained hopeful. She was in Sloan Kettering Hospital about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and they came to her and they said, "I'm sorry, Marlene, we can't treat you anymore for the cancer. You're too weak. You can't take the treatment. The cancer has advanced too far. We think you should go to hospice." What does Marlene do? She bolts up in the bed and she says, "You're giving up on me? I want to live. I want to fight. Send me to rehab. I'll show you." And we got her to rehab. But the will was greater than the body's ability. But my admiration for the way she conducted herself made these hard times, in many ways, the most special of the times. When she was in the hospital, she got visits not only from people that you would expect, but how many people get visits from their hairdresser, their dentist, and their veterinarian? She had a big impact on people. In addition to visits from those people, she had a friend since she was 2 years old in Fremont that lives in Kansas, and she came in and spent a week with her. Yuri and Tanya came in from Connecticut. They spent time with her. She has a friend of over 50 years further up in Connecticut named Martha Miller. She was down almost every Saturday on the train. And these are not young people that are doing this traveling. I think some of you may have remembered the story of the young lady from Barcelona that came by accident to live with us. It's kind of a long story. She came in from Barcelona to spend 10 days with Marlene, 8 of which she spent at her bedside. Jeremy Glazier, who has spent over a 10-year span, on and off, while going to school and looking for school and jobs and back and forth. He was kind enough to come up since the 1st of February and has been with me all the time, and people are worried how you're doing and whatever. And Jeremy, I assure you, annoyed me enough in ways which were a complete distraction from my sorrow, and I value your annoyance, Jeremy. Thank you very much. He also helped me with all the computer stuff, which you wouldn't have heard from me as often as you did. I've always thought that Marlene, people knew her, they liked her, but I didn't think that most people knew the totality of what Marlene was. And if you'll be patient with me, I'd like to share some of that with you today. She went to UCLA from Fremont, Ohio. That's a pretty big thing for a small town in the 50s to suddenly you're going to UCLA. The way she got there is interesting because her parents had sent her. She went to a summer dance camp in Massachusetts called Jacob's Pillow, and she was there for the whole summer. And she's enrolled at Northwestern, and her parents sent her a letter. No emails, no phone calls, a letter to say, well, we sold the house, we sold the business, we disenrolled you from Northwestern, you're now going to UCLA. Duh. Her mother's uncle was a physician in UCLA, and her mother felt that that would be a good move. So she went to UCLA, goes through undergraduate, goes through the graduate program, has a master's in UCLA. This little girl from Fremont, a lot of famous and successful actors and actresses, now everybody's an actor, went to UCLA. In her graduate program, every year they would award a Best Actor and Best Director. And some of the people that were there, I don't know necessarily the same year, but you know of Beau Bridges and you know of George Takei, Mr. Sulu on Star Trek, a number of very well-known people. In the year that she was in the program, one person was awarded both awards. And that person was Marlene Ascherman. She came to New York with great hopes. She wanted to do theater. She could have stayed out there and done television or production or whatever. She had done a number of plays out there in the summer. And she came to New York, and like most people that come to New York that are very talented, you need a break. Somebody has to like you or see you or whatever, and it didn't quite happen for her. So what did she do? Did she accept defeat? No. She got a job with the city, and for 8 years she was a primary writer and creative force on a documentary television program for the city of New York, which was on Municipal Channel 31, a weekly show, original every week, which would examine the current social issues in New York City. She was extremely proud of that work, and well, she should have been. She also worked in child welfare, and she was instrumental in changing the dynamic for trying to have older children and sibling group older children have a chance at adoption. The babies get adopted, the older kids stay in foster care forever. So there was a big conference every year, and she listened to the kids. Instead of everybody thinking they knew what was best for the kids, she listened to the kids. The kids wanted to represent themselves. So she had slides, she had the narrative, she had all that, but she also had the kids there. And everybody says, oh, if they're not picked, they're going to be crushed, they're going to be destroyed. And all the kids said to her, hey, we're already in a bad situation. We want some control over how we're presented and whether we have a chance to find a home. It was a major breakthrough for them. The city's Department of Aging, when she worked there, also entrusted her with running Age in Action, which was a 6-hour-long outdoor event at Lincoln Center on 2 different stages with different acts scheduled every 5, 10, and 15 minutes. And she and I worked together, went all around the city to all the different senior centers on audition groups and cleaned up their acts and scheduled them. It was a major undertaking. And for you folks that'll know, our 2 stars that we had one year, we had a headliner each year. The first year was Eubie Blake. Anybody know who that is? Come on, Herb. 100-year-old jazz trumpeter. And I'm sure more of you will know, the second year, I got the honor of walking over, because she lived right in Lincoln Center Towers, to escort Molly Pecan back to the venue and to the stage. Molly Pecan at that point was close to 90. When she got on the stage, she did a somersault. It was pretty cool. Marlene also worked in a program to help public assistance women get their first work opportunity. She had a Dress for Success closet, she did resumes, she did a number of things to try to help people that had been, in effect, given up on and didn't have confidence in themselves. And she changed a lot of people's lives, and they came back and thanked her for that. Remarkable career. She also was a very, very generous person in terms of opening her heart. This young lady from Barcelona met Marlene in an emergency room, a two-person emergency room cubicle. And she had come to the U.S. as a au pair Spanish teacher for a rich family. She had been hit by a car, her ankle was broken and dislocated. They exchanged phone numbers. We like each other. Whenever we both feel better, we'll have lunch. The young lady went back to the family. She couldn't perform the functions anymore. They threw her out. She had no place to go. She didn't know anybody. She calls Marlene. A bit of a wild child, a bit of a handful, loving, good heart. Marlene and I, we both worked with her, and she did well. She went on to get her master's degree. She's back in Barcelona now. I told you she came to visit, and she sent a message, and some of these messages are on the website, so if you go to the website, you can see them. But I'd like to read it to you anyway. I'm sorry if this is taking a long time, but I feel that this needs to be said. Marlene will always be my American mother, the best mother life could have given to me. She taught me about the importance of fending for myself, how crucial it is to be a strong, independent woman, to follow my dreams while having my feet on the ground. She taught me about the importance of hard work, shared with me her love for Judaism, made me love her heritage, and she was the best clothing stylist I will ever have. She would always comfort me when I cried, which was a lot. She rooted for me during my master's degree, and no night went by without her good wishes. There's a Jewish phrase here, or a Yiddish phrase, and I'm not sure if it's correct, and I certainly don't know how to pronounce it, but in effect, at night, Marlene would say to her, "Rest your beautiful head and sleep." Now it's you, Marlene, who is resting her beautiful head and sleeping forever. And I will carry you and all your teaching with me for as long as I live. You lived a long and productive life, and when you less were expecting it, you got a Catalan daughter. Catalonia is the region of Spain. I was 25 years old, but believe me when I tell you that you made me learn it all over again. I will be forever grateful to life for you. Today the sun is shining in Barcelona, and I'm sure it is because of you. Your witty smile is here. I love you, your Catalan daughter. We went to a reunion in Fremont back in the 80s. And Marlene was kind of a star in Fremont, so everybody thought she was having the best time of all. She had the lead in the junior play, she had the lead in the senior play, but in fact, she was very disturbed by overt, intentional, unintentional, institutional anti-Semitism. And despite her apparent success and happiness, there were troubled times for her. She actually stood up in Mr. McClintock's class and challenged the teacher on something that he said that she felt was inappropriate. Her parents enrolled her in a religion class at the school, and they honored all religions and had ceremonies for different holidays and different religions, except when it came to Judaism. So at her 25th reunion, I accompanied her. We went to each other's reunions. And there was a man, a student there, who had never been to a reunion before, his 25th. And the reason was he was sort of an in the background, kind of invisible classmate that had not yet come into who he was going to be. His name was James C. Milliron. He became successful. I believe he had a military career. And his wife, who surprisingly enough had a similar profile to Marlene in terms of a love of theater, and she was an actress and everything, convinced him that he should get over it. Go back, go to your 25th, see the people that maybe weren't so comfortable for you to see before. I was with her. She looked great. She had this silver jumpsuit on. And, you know, at reunions, everybody comes up with superficial, hey, how you doing? How's everything? What are you working? And then they go on to the next person. She and James got into a very much longer, more in-depth conversation. And I just kind of faded away so that they could have this conversation. And I knew it was meaningful for both of them, but I didn't know how meaningful it was. The class began sharing Marlene's illness around, and James C. Milliron sent the following email. At Fremont Ross, I admired you and envied you from great distance. You were always out there, vivacious, funny, leading our class through the exciting stretches of our run for a diploma. And theatrics, I know about the theatrics. I married a girl just like you. Though you may not recall our class reunion, it was a revelation for me. It was at the Fremont Yacht Club. You asked me to sit with you for a few minutes, and we talked and talked. That was quite a moment, to have our class star sit with me. Importantly, you related your feelings of isolation, inadequacy, trepidation, doubt, all the emotions that seemed to stop me in my progress through high school. I would have not guessed that our challenges were the same. More importantly, you asked about my life. I knew that your inquiry was sincere and concluded that we could have been good friends at Ross. I believe that we were sent to earth by God and given our own circumstances and given the opportunity to make our own circumstances the best experience we can. Those who are smart and gifted and industrious improve the experience of us all. Scientists give us medicine, computers, and appliances. Engineers give us automobiles. Artists entertain us, show us the beauty that surrounds us, and help us pry open and examine our souls. The best that most of us can do is use the soft word, the empathetic touch, and sincere understanding to make the life experience of another better. Now, there are special people on the earth, special people who are gifted and smart and change the course of many others all at once, and who also have the amazing ability to extend kindness and sincerity to individuals about them, to make their personal experience better. You have done that for me. It is a nice connection, my friend. You are special. Marlene Ascherman. In the last week of her life, on that Tuesday, she received a dozen roses from her friends in Fremont High School. Thanksgiving was that Thursday. I had this decision to make. I knew that she was fading. I wasn't sure how aware she would be, but I decided to wait until Thursday. I was always careful with the type of card I gave her and paid great attention to its content. So on that day, I gave her the dozen roses. I showed her the card. I read the card to her. She was not verbally responsive, but I think she understood. And so this card, I would like to read it to you, and I know it's kind of, use your own words, but this card just expresses my feelings. And after I read this card, we'll be finished, and the card will be placed with her forever. I love you in so many ways and for so many reasons. Because you know me and understand me like no one else ever could. Because you believe in my dreams and care about my feelings. Because you make me laugh so hard and smile so often. Because you have a way of bringing out the very best in me. I love you in so many ways and for so many reasons, but mostly because you're my very best friend. Whenever she would introduce me to somebody in the hospital that was caring for her that I hadn't yet met, she would always say, "This is who I've been telling you about. This is my Colwyn." So I signed the card, "My devoted and everlasting love, your Colwyn."
I now want to ask Marlene's cousin, Lee Ascherman, to come forward and to say a few words about her.
So, Colin had said to Lindsay this morning, he just was a little worried we'd overlap. And Lindsay assured him that probably not, but, when somebody's a good person, it's hard not to overlap. So. And when Colin thanked Lindsay a few days ago, Lindsay said, well, he had mostly talked to me. And Colin kind of joked that every time, though, he would hear me turn to Lindsay and say, "Isn't that right?" And he said that that's what he would do. So Marlene was a person who loved life and always seemed young at heart. She defied age, and that is what makes her passing especially difficult to grasp. And as Colin said, painfully, she was clear that she was not ready to relinquish life. She had an enthusiasm and joy in living that betrayed her age and the slings and arrows of life. Less than a week before she died, when one of my daughters came into her room sporting a trendy scarf and cap, Marlene's eyes opened wide, as Colin described, and she said with vigor, having been very quiet for a long time, "Oh, how cute." And observing the visits of so many friends and family who loved her also brought back to me a memory of her coming to Cleveland to visit our Aunt Bee when she was ill. And I think I recall that she actually brought Aunt Bee a trendy cap to keep warm. Marlene was always attuned to what was different and special. As a child, I remember her visiting my parents and always bringing cashew butter. And given that all I knew was Peter Pan peanut butter, it really seemed quite exotic. And she also educated me on other foods. When Lindsay and I were in training in Washington, we visited Marlene and Colin, and they served us tuna fillets. And that was my awakening that tuna could come in some form other than from a can. I don't think Marlene and Colin were aware that my palate wasn't quite ready for this, but their cats knew. They had a memorable feast of tuna fillet that I slipped them in small-sized portions. Marlene and Colin also introduced Lindsay and I to the tougher aspects of life in New York in the early 80s during that visit. So when we arrived, we asked if we had parked correctly on the street. They told us we had, and also told us that we had about a 50-50 chance that the car would be there in the morning. And it was not because it could be towed. and I didn't sleep well that night. A few evenings ago, Lindsay mused that Marlene had such a good heart. She was incredibly generous, not only in her acts of charity, like the clothing drive to help underprivileged women dress right for job interviews, but through countless acts of kindness, and I suspect most were never known. Maimonides said that the highest level of charity was charity given anonymously. And I suspect rarely a day went by that Marlene and Cowan did not reach out to help some person or animal in need. Marlene had a keen eye for those in need, and many returned her kindnesses. Cowan spoke about the woman in Barcelona. When I was a teen, I recall riding the subway with Marlene while my father was working, and we met a woman from France who barely spoke English and was lost. So we helped her find her way. And I don't remember exactly how it happened, but the next day when Marlene and I went to Jones Beach, our new French friend made the outing with us. Marlene's generosity was certainly reflected in her lengthy career in social service. She was committed to those she helped, and I believe she felt she worked for them, not the agency. Their lives were brightened by her presence and advocacy for them, and she in turn was rewarded with their genuine affection and appreciation. Marlene could stand up for what was right when services were jeopardized or policies seemed counter to what was right. And there is a streak in the Aschermans that my father articulated, that some rules were meant to be broken. And that was his logic for stashing me in a laundry cart to visit my mother at the old Mount Sinai Hospital when children were not allowed. And I think Marlene had a similar ethos and came by it naturally. Studies show that the difference between a bystander and one who acts is a strong capacity for empathy and the encouragement from within by voices of loved ones who say, you can't stand by, you have to do something. Marlene was principled and was not one to just stand by. And when someone demonstrated prejudice or poor character, she had little patience for them. She thought them fools, and she didn't suffer fools lightly. And most here know that Marlene was foremost devoted to her parents throughout their lives, and especially in their later years. We also know that for Marlene, family was everything. Marlene loved her family, even if you were a fourth cousin twice removed. Perhaps it was because she was the only one of our first cousins who did not have a sibling, or because the family she knew growing up did not hold. But regardless, Marlene would drop everything for family. And given her good life with Cowan, she could have been someone that Clevelanders did not see often or know very well. But that was not the case. She was at every happy and sad occasion she could attend here and elsewhere, and loved her role as the family photographer despite having a cousin who was a professional photographer. And when family came to New York, she and Cowan dropped everything to host them and give them the grand tour. Marlene often met my father when he worked in New York, and I suspect there were many aunts, uncles, and cousins greeted similarly. In my parents' later years, a cousin of my mother's, who unbeknownst to her survived the war, located my mother. It had been over 40 years since the end of the war. He and his family now lived in New York, and he wanted my parents, who were nearly too frail to travel, to visit. And my parents, to my surprise, wanted to make the trip. And they did so, but only with Marlene and Cowan's help. They royally hosted my parents in their home and got them to my mother's cousin. It was a real mitzvah. My parents could never have navigated that trip without them. And I joked with Lindsay that for those who knew my parents, consequently Colin and Marlene saved New York from a lot of trauma. And fast forward to the visitation from Marlene in New York earlier this week. I learned that our cousin Alice, her daughter Julie, my sister Arlene, my daughters Anne and Amy, and my nephew Jeremy were there and spent time getting reacquainted. This is not a constellation that would usually gather together. And I thought, even at this sad occasion, Marlene had a hand in bringing family together, the family she loved, and she'd be very pleased. Marlene was knowledgeable about our family's history and highly attuned to the joys and sadness of the family, since our parents, aunts, and uncles were children over 100 years ago. And I noticed in recent years, particularly after her retirement, that she seemed more reflective on Jewish history, especially that of the last century, both traumatic and celebratory. And we all began to expect her emails of facts, history, and humor. I usually got the chance to look at these late at night after a busy day and would be treated to funny videos or movie photos. Marlene was also a devoted and loyal friend. Friends were as good as family. And as Colin mentioned, she remained very close to many of her childhood friends from Fremont, and her friend who now lives in Kansas traveled to New York to visit her, and as Colin mentioned, Uri and his wife are here now. As everyone knows, Marlene loved theater and performance. It was such an important part of her life and identity, and I suspect her talents as an actress and director came not only from her training at UCLA, but from her capacity to place herself in others' shoes. And this was the same ability that made her generous, caring, and charitable. Her attunement to animals, especially her cats, reflected that same ability to recognize vulnerability and innocence and to act. Although I am a dog person, Marlene and Colin taught me to appreciate their cats. They explained to me each of their history, character, style, fears, and pleasures. And all were originally abandoned and vulnerable. In our neighborhood back home, Lindsay and I rarely see outdoor cats, almost never. But this past Monday, Lindsay told me about a white cat she saw on our stoop. And I wondered, did Marlene have a hand in that? Like all of us, Marlene had reason to be sour on life, but she was not. Erik Erikson defined the key challenge of adulthood as the dilemma between whether one would be generative or would stagnate. And by being generative, he did not mean just productivity for self-gratification or aggrandizement, but as generosity, an interest and investment in others, a capacity for love, and awareness of those who came before us and those who come after us. And by that standard, Marlene led an exemplary life, a life well lived. Not long ago, I came across an interview with our grandfather, Grandpa Iggy, and it was published in a local paper embedded in an article on Father's Day. It was written probably over 70 years ago. Grandpa spoke of how proud he was of his children and their achievements, but that he was most proud that they all grew up to care about others. And he added that all the education in the world didn't matter if you don't have a heart. And it struck me that he voiced another implicit family ethos, one that Marlene exemplified. I've been told that when my mother was pregnant, Grandpa Iggy asked my oldest sister if she wanted a baby brother or sister. And my sister answered that she wanted a baby seal. Those who remember, Grandpa by then was not great at hearing. He had the old-fashioned horn. And when she said that, he replied, "That's okay as long as it's an Ascherman." And Marlene was the essence of Grandpa's values. She was fiercely proud and loyal to her family, and she had a lot of heart. Several weeks ago, Lindsay and I came to New York and came to the hospital with our children, cousin Alice, was already there, and we had not had time to stop and get flowers. And I apologized to Marlene and said, I can't give you anything but love, which led to everyone trying to remember the lyrics, and we couldn't, except Marlene, who sang them with hand motions. Marlene had a lot of love and a tremendous capacity to give love. Her friend from Fremont moved to Kansas. We lived in Kansas. All of our children were born in Kansas, and Kansas obviously is the scene for The Wizard of Oz. And at the end, when the wizard speaks to the Tin Man, he says something that at first struck me as counterintuitive, but he said that hearts will never be practical until they're made unbreakable. But he also said that a heart is not judged by how much it loves, but by how much it is loved by others. I think the values of the importance of family and the concern for others and sensitivity to others are why our cousins remain close, despite differences in generations, geography, and lifestyle. And Marlene was our spokesperson for these values. All the first cousins have the same photo of our grandparents and their 8 children, spanning almost 20 years. It's a powerful photo that captures a moment exactly 100 years ago. Our grandmother was terminally ill, but the message from that photo was that the family was together and would be together. And it was poignant that we lost Marlene almost exactly 100 years to that photo. And I'm aware of that because in the photo, my father was 3, and his birthday is January 18th, and our grandmother passed away in early March. I cannot, and then I wanted to say that in that subsequent 100 years, a lot happened. And the family welcomed all those who joined the family, whether they realized that they had joined or what they had joined. Which brings us to Colin. And I cannot conclude without noting how fortunate Marlene was to have Colin for 40 years. For most of their time together, they were blessed with health and an ability to enjoy life and each other. But these last 6 months were extremely difficult. Colin was steadfastly at Marlene's side, offering care, advocacy, comfort, and hope. And we should all be so lucky. The most difficult junction was a few weeks ago when hope dimmed. Marlene was not ready to accept this, and Colin protected her. She did not want to go gently into the night, and Colin respected that. And I respect that Marlene did not want to relinquish life easily because she so enjoyed life. Marlene also had a remarkable capacity, as everyone has noted, to take in others, literally and figuratively. And we, in turn, are blessed by her example and keep her memory alive by carrying her and her values within us. As in the case for all, Marlene's life wasn't without challenges, disappointments, and loss, but she avoided bitterness and maintained a stubborn love of life, enriched by her love of others. She thrived on giving to others, and that is her greatest legacy. Her memory is a blessing.
After these most loving and moving tributes, I had thought myself to make a couple of comments, but most of what I have to say was already said by those who knew Marlene and Colin best. But I do want to just add something that one of Marlene's cousins, Marilyn Beadall, said to me the other day when I talked to her on the phone in preparation for this day. Marilyn said that Colwyn deserves a halo for all that, Colwyn, you did for Marlene over those many, many years, and especially, as has just been said, over the last several months. While I came to understand you are still taking care of your mother, who is 104 years old? 106 years old, combined to make a Herculean effort on behalf of two people that you loved and that you cared about so deeply, and for which we feel overwhelming admiration. Let us pause now for each of us to inscribe in his or her heart the life, the qualities, the accomplishments of Marlene Ascherman. O God of life, amid the ceaseless tides of change which sweep away the generations, your love remains to comfort us and to give us hope. Around us are life and death, decay and renewal, the flowing rhythm that all things obey. Our life is a dance to a song that we cannot hear. Its melody courses through us for a little while, then it seems to cease. Whence the melody and whither does it go? In darkness as in light, we turn to you, the source of life and the answer to all of life's mysteries. Will you please rise now for the El Mole Rachamim? El Mole Rachamim, Shochein Bam Romim, Hamtzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Hashchina, Im Kadoshim Utahorim Kazohar Harakia Mazhirim, Et Nishmat Yakirenu Shahachala Olama, Bala Rachamim Yastireo Beseter Ganafav Olamim, V'yitzror Bitzra HaChayim Et Nishmata, Adonai Hu Nachalata V'tanuach B'shalom Al Mishkava V'nomar Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Marlene Ascherman, our loved one who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let her find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and let her soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is her inheritance. May she rest in peace. And let us say together, Amen. This concludes our service here. Our service will continue presently at graveside at the Mayfield Cemetery.